Hi everyone, and welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. And tonight I'm going to be talking about the path of initiation. And I'll be providing a fairly detailed overview of what initiation is in terms of inner self-development and transformation, and the different stages along the path of initiation. And I'm going to be focusing on the Western esoteric tradition and the initiatory path, which I consider to be the best and most effective form of initiation in that tradition, namely the initiatory grade system of the Argenteum Astrum, otherwise known as the AA. Initiation has been around for thousands of years and has existed in, I would say, every human culture. There were initiation rites to mark the passage from childhood into adulthood. There were certain initiation rites for boys who were becoming men, and there were other initiation rites for girls who were becoming women. There was some kind of a rite of passage to mark the transition from immaturity to maturity in this way, and taking on a important role in the community. But of course there are other kinds of initiations too, namely a spiritual type of initiation. This is understood as something which transforms the individual, changes them in some important way to become closer to the divine. And just as the other forms of initiation mark the passage from immaturity to maturity, childhood to adulthood, these spiritual forms of initiation mark the transition from a state of relative spiritual ignorance to one of greater spiritual enlightenment or illumination. And there have been many orders, many schools over the centuries also which have used initiation in order to transform the individual, to get closer to the divine. But where the principle of initiation is concerned, we need to understand really two things. First of all, as I've explained, the principle of change. In our current state, we are fairly mundane creatures. We're fairly close to the physical world and seldom rise above that or the concerns of that level of existence when we're going through our lives and deciding the kind of life that we want to lead. So in order to become more spiritual beings, we need to transform ourselves, change the way that we perceive reality and the goals that we set in our life and what we consider to be important. And that requires a change from how we were before, brought on by, say, initiation. And all of this is leading us away from the things of the world, up towards the divine. But it's not possible to change in an instant and then be at a level, resonating in a level that is comparable to the highest divinity. It would be too much of a shock to the system for that to happen. And so just as to reach great heights, we must walk up a flight of stairs one step at a time, we must change one step at a time, and we must move through a series of grades in order to reach that ultimate level of divinity that we're trying to reunite with. Hence the grades system of an initiatory school. You're initiated into one particular grade, one particular level of the system to gain a certain level of spiritual understanding, and then when you're ready, you can move to the next level. And so when we're talking about spiritual initiation as the path back to divinity, what we're really concerned with is a specific type of initiation that is concerned with the process of individual inner transformation. That can be contrasted with other forms of initiation, such as in various societies throughout history, and even secret societies like the Freemasons, which is basically conferring a title, conferring a position or a role within a very external structure or community, which doesn't necessarily contain any kind of kernel of spiritual truth that really transforms the soul. But there are types of initiation with that specific goal in mind, and the initiations of the AA are just such types of initiations. And with this type of initiation, there can sometimes be a ritual that accompanies the initiation, sometimes, not always. The more important part of the initiatory process is what is happening inside the individual's consciousness, inside their conscious experience, and the inner aspect of that transformation. That can be brought on by an external ritual, but it doesn't have to be. Unlike how we commonly think of initiations, the ritual is actually not the important thing. It is the change that makes the initiation authentic. You can have as many grades or as many titles in some fraternal order as you like and still be very spiritually ignorant, particularly if you think that having those titles or those grades makes you superior to other people, gives you some kind of authority that you can lord over others. That is the mark of the uninitiated. So there can be a lot of confusion when we conflate external grades and hierarchies within a spiritual system with an actual level of initiation, an inner state of knowing, an inner state of awakening. And these are kind of the governing principles of the AA. It's a path of personal transformation above all, and it's also a graded system, and its goal is the reunion of the individual with the divine. And as I've said earlier in this video, in my opinion, it's the best of its type today. And I'm not the only person who thinks that, who has a platform talking about esoteric topics. So now I'm going to go into detail about the AA system, and hopefully you'll be able to see why it's such a useful tool for transforming ourselves spiritually, and in a systematic and somewhat rational way, finding our way back to the source. So the AA, or Argenteum Astrum, or Order of the Silver Star, was an esoteric order founded by the British occultist of the late 19th, early 20th century, Aleister Crowley. He was the founder of the spiritual philosophy of Thelema, centered around true will and the will being the most important thing. He founded the Order of the AA as a vehicle to kind of promote his philosophy of Thelema. However, the AA as a system can kind of be appreciated beyond the Thelemic spiritual philosophy. It's based on traditions which far predate Thelema, and are, systems of great wisdom in their own right. And even though I've kind of distanced myself from Crowley quite a bit these days, and have kind of, in my own process of initiation and development, found myself moving away from Thelema a bit, I can still appreciate the AA as a magical and mystical system which is of great benefit and great use to those that are on the esoteric path. So what are these earlier traditions that the AA draws on? Well, it draws very heavily on the initiatory system of an earlier secret society, namely the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, of which Crowley was a member, and eventually fell out and used the Golden Dawn material about how they initiated people, how they kind of marked and categorized various levels of spiritual development, and he used that as the basis of his own system in the AA. It's very similar. The AA system is very similar to the Golden Dawn system. And there's two other key differences between the AA system and the Golden Dawn system. Firstly, there's the introduction of Eastern so-called techniques, the four great yogas of Vedic religion, as well as the practices of Mahasatipatthana in Buddhism, what would today be referred to as mindfulness meditation. These kinds of practices from Hinduism and Buddhism made their way into what was an otherwise Western system and were incorporated into the structure that the Golden Dawn had laid out before with the Western techniques, which were very, very much based in Rosicrucianism, Hermeticism, the Kabbalah, and a dash of Christian mysticism and Gnosticism. And the other big difference between the Golden Dawn initiatory system and the AA initiatory system is that it adds 3 grades at the upper levels, which don't exist in the Golden Dawn system. These are the 3 grades that are above the so-called abyss. The Golden Dawn believed it was not possible for any mortal human being to reach those grades, that you had to be an ascended master to even reach them. The AA laid out a path for those who are still living to reach the same levels of spiritual attainment, and so added 3 grades at the end of its system. So what is the basis of the general structure of the Golden Dawn system of initiation, and therefore of the AA system of initiation? It's based in the Hermetic Kabbalah. It's based on the diagram of the Tree of Life. If you need some background on Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, I'll put some links in the description below on some videos I've done on those topics. But basically what you need to know is this diagram, which I will show up on the screen now. This is what is known as the minutum mundum. It is a diagram of the 10 spheres or Sephiroth of the Tree of Life, connected by 22 paths. And each of those paths corresponds to one of the 22 trumps of the tarot, as well as a Hebrew letter. But the symbolism of the tarot trumps becomes particularly important in the systems of the Golden Dawn and the AA. And I've done some videos on the meanings of the 22 trumps now. If you want a bit more background on that, I can link those in the description as well, if that's something that would interest you. So this is the diagram that we have, and it's really considered a diagram of the different planes of existence, from the most earthly and gross and mundane up to the most heavenly, highest levels of the cosmos, and can also be considered a map of human consciousness, which follows that same gradation of lowest to highest vibrational level. And you could even say that by being in a certain state of consciousness, you are entering into a certain level of the heavens, kind of traveling without moving, simply by shifting your perspective, by shifting your awareness to a different frequency or level of reality, to use the kind of modern New Age language of explaining this idea. And so the goal of the Kabbalist was to move from the bottom of the tree, representing the earth, up to the top, representing the highest levels of divinity. And in order to be fully initiated, it was necessary to have a holistic view of the universe, to integrate each different energy from each level of the tree, in the Sephiroth as well as in the paths, to make sure that we've processed all karma, all experience that we need to fully experience this reality before we can then kind of reconcile it all back to God. So we need a way of moving through the tree of life, and that is done through a series of practices. There are a number of grades or levels of initiation in the AA system, corresponding to one of the Sephiroth, one of the 10 Sephiroth in this diagram. Within each grade, you need to kind of absorb and process the energy of that particular Sephiroth and its surrounding paths, and fully integrate that in a healthy way to reach the next level of initiation. But you also need to complete a series of tasks within the grade, which are really the mastery of a number of spiritual practices, which will teach you certain spiritual lessons and confer upon you a level of experience that will then give you the right to be initiated into the next level of the system. So what are the different grades of the AA? I'm not going to go into too much detail because the video will be too long, but I'll give a brief overview now with reference to a handy minutum mundum diagram. So the first 2 grades of the AA system, before we even get to the tree, are student and probationer. The student is basically somebody who studies, has to prove that they really want to join the order or approach the order. Then they'll be allowed to be a probationer, where they have a superior and now they're kind of got their training wheels on, and they need to prove themselves to the order through practice. So they will have a spiritual practice that they nominate, that they have to do for a year and record the results in a magical journal to be examined as to whether they're worthy to move to the next level, which is where they start to enter the tree of life proper. So the next level in the AA grade system is the level of neophyte, corresponding to Malkut, the earthy Sephira. And so as that Sephira is very associated with earth and groundedness, this is where you're laying a foundation of your practice. You're learning the basic practices of the Western esoteric tradition. You're also learning about the 4 powers of the Sphinx, one for each element, to balance the 4 elements within the world, laying the foundation for the rest of your advancement. The next level is that of Zelator in the sphere of Yesod, the purple sphere on the diagram. And this is, as Yesod is associated with the moon, this is very much associated with visionary experiences, inner experiences, exploring the subconscious. This is where there's a bit more astral travel and practicing techniques for that. This is where there's more visualization type meditations, kind of an exploration of the inner world of the unconscious. The grade of Yesod, the grade of Zelator, you have to master asana and pranayama. And so with pranayama in particular, we see this sort of theme of breath work, of control of the prana. Again, the kind of the most kind of those parts of our being which are above the physical but probably closest to the physical out of all the non-physical aspects of our being. So very Yesodic symbolism there as well. The next grade is that of Practicus. This is one of intellectual learning, of understanding jnana yoga, or union with the divine through knowledge, as well as studying the Kabbalah, which is a very intellectual form of spirituality. And that's the orange Sephira here. Next, we move to the green Sephira of Netzach for the grade of Philosophus. And this is really about moral practices and devotion, approaching the divine through devotion and learning devotional practices, as Netzach is the sphere of love. Next is Tifereth, the center of the tree, the union of heaven and earth. This is where we have knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel. There's kind of a intermediate grade before Adeptus Minor, which is the grade in Tifereth, which is called Dominus Liminis. And then the Adeptus Minor grade in Tifereth is divided into Adeptus Minor without and within, which just means before and after knowledge and conversation. And so the experience of knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel represents the union of the divine and the human, and that is the whole fulcrum of the tree, with Tifereth forming the center, representing that union. The next grade is the grade of Adeptus Minor. This is the grade that is in the red sphere of Geburah, the sphere of Mars. This is about learning self-reliance. As Geburah is a very severe kind of Sephira, this is all about learning the principles of self-reliance and self-determination. This is where you also start to learn about how to use alchemy, or what is referred to in Thelemic vernacular as the Grand Arcanum, using the vital forces of the body to project your will and to feed into the magical intent that you're putting out. Here we've seen in Geburah the grade of Adeptus Major. Next we move to the grade of Adeptus Exemptus in Chesed, this blue sphere here. And this is a very magnanimous sphere of the heavens and a very royal sphere. And so the Adeptus Exemptus is one who really embodies the perfection of the work thus far, really perfecting their mastery of the various different disciplines that they've explored before this point, and to such an extent that they can be regarded as a spiritual teacher. They've got sufficient expertise to become the leader of their own school of thought, which kind of innovates upon everything that they've learned. That's the level of mastery they will have attained. at this level. But the most important work for the Adeptus Exemptus is to prepare for the crossing of the abyss. They cross the abyss, they go through this existential, mystical experience called crossing the abyss, where they lose awareness of their individual self and unite with pure divinity. They become a babe of the abyss, and then from there they move into the grade of Magister Templi, corresponding to Binah, this black sphere. And this is really, once you reach the supernal triad, you're really, of these last three Sephira, this is where, you're the Magister Templi, you're a spiritual master, you're among the secret chiefs, and playing the role of a secret chief. By the time you move to the next grade of Magus, here in Hokmah, the seat of the Logos, the Word of God as expressed through creation to recreate the world, you'll really become a prophet in the true sense of the word. And you've become so purified as a vessel for divinity that it can move freely through you and express its will through you to the rest of the world. And then the final grade, Ipsissimus, in this white sphere of Keter at the top, is basically spiritual enlightenment at this point. You've destroyed all your karma. You're ready to just be completely reintegrated into the divine. As indeed everything that was of the created universe initially unfolded from Keter. So hopefully you'll see how the grades are very neatly sort of placed on the tree of life, and you can decode the symbolism of each grade, each step on the path of initiation, by looking at the tree of life. And in addition, with the tasks, each task for the grade is put in a particular grade intentionally because it corresponds either to the energy of that Sephira that the grade is in, or one of the paths sort of roughly surrounding where that Sephira is on the tree. So for example, in the grade of Practicus, the orange sphere, the intellectual sphere of Hod, there's the practice of Jnana Yoga, which is very much about cultivating the intellect as a way of getting spiritual knowledge. So each Sephira has its own tasks. Each of the 22 paths has its own tasks as well. So for example, the path of Samek, which lies between Tifereth and Yesod, is attributed the task of rising through the planes. This is basically like an astral travel type of a task where you need to learn how to raise your astral body through the various spheres. And this is supposed to ultimately bring you closer to divinity. And so we see a combination of the kind of exploration of the unconscious of Yesod with the divine realization and elevation in Tifereth, which is seen in the path of Samek and in as an outcome of successfully engaging in the practice of rising through the planes. So there's the kind of, what I would really say are the most important tasks for each grade, which is these spiritual practices that you need to master at each level. In addition to that, there's other stuff which in my opinion is a bit more superfluous, such as, memorizing verses of the holy books as examined by your superior. There's ceremonial initiations in some of the grades. Well, mainly it's just, you could say there's one for probationer, but mainly it's neophyte, that first sphere of Malkut that has a rite of initiation, and the sphere of Yesod that has a rite of initiation associated with entry into the Zelator grade. And then there's another initiation associated with the grades of Tifereth. But these are the only three formal initiations in the proper sense within the AA system. And they all center around the kind of mysteries of death and resurrection. There's also a curriculum or reading list for each grade of stuff that you're supposed to learn. Really, I think the most important key part of this all is the tasks. And to me, that is the real meat of the system, and the most relevant thing in terms of measuring how well you've progressed along the path. And you can kind of complete the tasks technically in any order. Doesn't have to be in its particular grade. It's better if you do it that way, because the tasks, as I've said, are grouped in such a way that they give you all of the kind of same or similar spiritual lessons at the same level of initiation before you move to the next one, to more fully integrate that particular level of initiation all at once. And perhaps you need to do that before you move on to the higher levels, again, to form that foundation. But sometimes it's just not practical to wait before you perform a particular task. So it doesn't have to be perfectly chronological progression through the different tasks. One thing that I will say though is that Crowley isn't for everyone, and although he was definitely a great magician and he communicated a lot of really amazing information from the previous traditions which he truly excelled in, he could also corrupt a lot of things, put his own kind of personal branding on things which can kind of put some people off, which is why, if you go back to the source material, that can be a good thing. As a guide, you can kind of look at his magical journals, particularly things like the Confessions of Aleister Crowley, to see what he was doing during the various grades. But depending on what your spiritual path is, his kind of little innovations in the system, the stuff that he added from his own personal philosophy and personal revelation, might not be taking you in the direction that you want to be going in. If you're not a Thelemite, there's a lot of Thelemic stuff in there, which wasn't in the original Golden Dawn material, which obviously wasn't in the original Yoga material. And also, one thing that I will say, which I think is getting into a bit too much specifics, but I think is important to cover, is this question of the Grand Arcanum. So this is something which is kind of hinted at as being commenced in the Adeptus Minor grade within, and seems to be a practice that is done in the Adeptus Major grade directly after that, quite a bit. If you're looking for an equivalent practice for this level of initiation from other traditions, really you're looking at the tantric practices and similar practices to that. Now, when you're talking about Tantra, you're kind of opening a can of worms, because there's not just one view on what the best or correct technique of Tantra is. There's, broadly speaking, two tantric schools. There's the Black Tantra school and the White Tantra school. That sounds very moralistic and black and white in a moral sense. It's not necessarily to impugn a moral judgment on those two schools, although it's certainly been interpreted in that way. But just to say that there are two different approaches to the use of the knowledge of Tantra. There's others as well. There's like a grey Tantra and a red Tantra. I'm not as familiar with, but black and white Tantra are the main ones. And Crowley's techniques are very much a form of black Tantra. But that's one view of the best use of Tantra. There's also white Tantra, which is a different view. So just be aware that choice is before you, depending on what you kind of value, will determine which path you take. There are some Taoists who have a kind of combination of both, but I won't get into too much detail about that, but I did want to flag it because it is an important stage in the path, an important decision that you will make if you ever reach that stage of the path. And if you let Crowley make that decision for you, you might end up becoming more like him, for better or for worse, I suppose, depending on the kind of life that you want to lead. So technically, this kind of initiation is something that you can do as a solitary practitioner. To an extent, it's something that you could do on your own, although that's a very hard way of doing it. it's always better to have a mentor or someone guiding you through the path. And that's why in the AA there is a system of master and student. There is a superior and their student, to avoid all the kind of politics and infighting that went along with other esoteric orders. That was the rationale for this sort of arrangement. I don't know how well it worked. But the superior is there not to tell you what to do, but really as a sounding board for your own experiences, as someone who has traveled the path before you, just to check you and see if you're on the right track. But ultimately, it's your own individual will and your own self-determination that powers you through the different levels. That's the only way that spiritual growth can happen in an authentic way. And ultimately, once you sort of have become an adeptus minor, at that point, the true superior, the true guru that you follow, there's only one. And that is your own inner guru, your own holy guardian angel, your own inner master. And really these ideas of the inner master and the holy guardian angel, they're really just concepts which are vehicles of Atman, our highest spiritual nature. And so from that point in the tree, from that point in the grade system, we're guided by our angel up through towards crossing the abyss, if we are one of the few who make it that far, and there are very few who have made it that far, and on to the supernal triad towards true union with divinity, and a state of being which is like being a living God. So that is the path of initiation, according to the system of the AA, from laying the foundations with some more basic introductory spiritual practices, to moving up to achieving knowledge and conversation, having laid that foundation in the first 4 grades on the tree of life, to then going through the more advanced practices, perfecting the practices that you've learnt as a mystic and a magician, and propelling yourself through the abyss to finally destroy your limited sense of self and become completely one with the divine. It's an incredible system. I used to be a member of the AA before I withdrew because of the change in my attitudes towards Thelema, but I highly rate it still. I still use it as a measure of my development on the spiritual path, and I find it very reliable. If you want to find out what the different tasks of the grades are, there's really 3 sources that these are found in. The grades from the lowest up to Adeptus Minor are detailed in Liber 13. The grades from Adeptus Minor up to Ipsissimus, the highest, are in 1 star in sight. And then there are some extra tasks that are mentioned in Liber Viarum VA. And, you know, it's a bit of a matter of putting the pieces of a puzzle together. You've got different grades and different paths and different letters and tasks. It's not always clear which tasks belong to which letter or which path. Fortunately, somebody has done all of that decrypting work for you. I would highly recommend The Mystical and Magical System of the AA by James Eshelman if you want to cut through a lot of the rubbish trying to solve all of Crowley's riddles to understand how the system actually all fits together. If you want to understand the background of the yogic side of the AA system, read Vivekananda's works on the 4 yogas. And if you want to understand the Golden Dawn aspect of it and how you can propel yourself through that without an esoteric order, there's a book, I believe it was called Self-Initiation into the Golden Dawn System. I'll put the details up on screen if I got that wrong. So that's where to look to understand this system more deeply. I might try and explore different aspects of the system more deeply on this channel, if that's something that you would be interested in. So that is the path of initiation. What you need to know about the path of initiation and why the AA system sets it out really neatly. I hope you enjoyed that. Whether or not you are aspiring towards the AA, or you're just curious, or you're on a completely different path, hopefully you got something helpful out of that. If you did enjoy it, please like the video, subscribe to support my work, subscribe to my Odyssey account as well, leave any comments you might have down below. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.